Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about astrology, the coronavirus, and Brazil. Now, many of you may have heard that Brazil had some proliferation of confirmed coronavirus cases in recent time, but there have been some reports, at least, that have stated that it appears that this is not the coronavirus is not growing exponentially anymore, and that likely that it has reached a plateau and in Brazil, and it's not at least it's at a point where it may be contained. So I'm going to look at some natal placements in Brazil's chart and some transits that might, we'll see if we can confer some of this information and whether they're going to actually have alleviation of this or not, or whether it might actually hit a point soon where it might be escalating again. So anyway, for me, I want to talk about some points first in the chart, in Brazil's chart, as far as natal placements and transits go, which are indicators where there's certain susceptibility for the coronavirus. The first thing I'm noticing, looking at this is the chart from Astro.com and A rating, which has the sun is in Virgo, and then you have the ascendant in Aquarius. The ascendant is at 22 degrees, which of course is a critical degree in astrology. As far as you're talking about, the ascendant in astrology can be associated with the physical body. So Brazil, I mean, being at 22 degrees at the ascendant, that can be, I would say there could be a greater propensity for things of a physical nature, given that it is the ascendant at 22 degrees, of course, a critical degree. You're talking about being in Aquarius, things of an unusual nature, or something that could, illnesses, debilitations that could happen by surprise. There may be more prone to body aches in the lower legs, the shins, the ankles. And you're talking about, as far as the sun being in Virgo, I mean, the sun can be associated with physical debilitations as well. And these can be connected with, you're talking about possible like diarrhea. There might be, I mean, diarrhea, not to be overly gross or grotesque, but diarrhea can be a symptom that is associated with the coronavirus. And the sun also looks like it conjuncts Mercury, at least a loose conjunction to Mercury. And when you have the sun conjunct Mercury in your chart, that could be an indicator of issues, that physical issues that might be tied in to breathing. Being in Virgo could be very worrisome issues. Now, also, when I'm looking at this chart for Brazil, also Saturn is in Taurus in the third house. Now, Saturn in Taurus by itself can sometimes manifest in debilitations and issues that might be tied into issues with the throat, with the neck. It can be coughing. Those are all, I mean, sore throats, coughing can be symptoms of the coronavirus. You also Saturn being in the third house of breathing can give issues. It could be stubborn uh, issues that are limitations and restrictions as far as breathing goes. And Saturn appears to be at a critical degree as well. Uh, you're talking also in this chart as well for Brazil. I noticed something else in the Brazil chart, which is to me, which can be a strong indicator for getting as far as susceptibility to the coronavirus. That one of the chart rulers, I mean, Aquarius is the ascendant, so it has two chart rulers, Saturn and Uranus. One of them, Uranus, makes a conjunction to Neptune, and Neptune, of course, is associated with diseases. Also, too, if we're looking at Pluto, the natal Pluto in Brazil's chart is in Aries at 0 degrees, a critical degree. In astrology, it is retrograde. Now, my guess is that now looking at transit Mars in Aries, there may be some alleviation from physical issues associated with the coronavirus, because Pluto can be associated with viruses. The fact that it's in Aries, it could be ones of an aggressive nature, and with the symptoms connected with the head, you're talking about fevers, headaches, and maybe even rashes, if that is a symptom of the coronavirus. The fact that transit Mars has made a separate, it's out of conjunction by transit with Pluto. It's not conjuncting Pluto anymore. So this may be a time where Brazil might be feeling from some alleviation of this coronavirus. My guess is when transit Mars was in the first house of Brazil and it was hitting Pluto, that is where this was likely more prevalent, it was more intense, and it was stronger. But now that you have transit Mars, Mars being associated, could be associated with physical issues, and being in Aries, ones that could be associated with issues with the head, like again headaches, fevers, rashes, even. The fact that this has passed Pluto and it's not in conjunction anymore with it, that is a sign of some alleviation right now, some relief of this pandemic. Now, also, what I'm noticing too is that in the natal chart of Brazil, you also have the Moon in Gemini conjunct Jupiter in Gemini. The Moon is the ruler of the sixth house of health uh, for um, for Brazil. Now, Cancer being on the sun, on the zodiac sign, Cancer is on the sixth house cusp for Brazil. And when you have Cancer on the sixth house cusp, sometimes it can manifest in issues that could be associated with the breast, the chest area. Now, symptoms, one symptom that can be associated with the coronavirus can be tied in with the chest, persistent, stubborn chest pain. The ruler of it being in the fourth house, no shocker here, that those issues can perhaps make one homebound. And you have Jupiter making a conjunction to that ruler. As I've stated in previous videos, I mean, Jupiter could be very paradoxical, could be very strongly benign and benevolent, but it could also have a tendency to enlarge and expand. The fact that it conjuncts Jupiter can exacerbate those issues, those health-related issues. Jupiter in Gemini by itself can at times indicate issues that can be enlarged, that are associated with the respiratory system, with breathing, and also could be issues with the arms, the hands, the shoulders. There can be body aches associated with that as well. And the fact that it conjuncts the moon, it could be more of an emotional type of situation where there's more, you're talking about higher, stronger emotional energy connected with this, more sensitivity to those issues. Moon in Gemini, as far as on an emotional level, I mean, you're talking about emotions that could be very, not just mercurial, but very excitable and high-strung energy. Response, and also Moon is responsive energy. And you're talking about Jupiter being conjuncted, that could exacerbate that energy. Uh, Another thing too, when I'm looking at this, also the ruler of the fourth house is in the sixth house. The fourth house has Taurus on it. The ruler of it, Venus in Leo, is in the sixth house. So that could be another indicator where you have physical debilitations revolving around the home. At some point, there would be some situation, some pandemic, in this case pandemic, that would where you'd have many people becoming sickly, debilitated, that may force them homebound. I'm sure there was stipulations in Brazil where people were forced to stay at home more frequently due to the coronavirus. This became a hot spot for the coronavirus. It may still be seen as one, but as of right now, according to reports, there is it's at a point where it appears to be contained, and it's not, at least at a point where it's going to escalate strongly, and it's at that it's plateaued or peaked at this point. Now, hopefully, prayerfully, that is the truth, that is the case. Now, Another thing I've noticed too in Brazil's chart, the ruler of the eighth house is in the eighth house. The eighth house can be associated with death. And you're talking about when you have the ruler, and it's also associated with viruses. When you have the ruler of the eighth house of death in the eighth house, the death, it can indicate many deaths that are associated with a virus. The ruler is Mercury, and Mercury again can be associated with breathing issues. Now, Mars can play a role in physical issues in one's in a chart. Now, Mars is in Scorpio. In Brazil's natal chart, Mars can be about Mars and Scorpio can sometimes manifest in physical issues that are virus related, because Scorpio, I would say, would be the sign associated with viruses because it is ruled by Pluto. There's really not too much more what I really could say as far as this, as far as transits go, natal placements that could be tied in to the as far as the coronavirus in Brazil. I noticed too that the transit Sun in Cancer at this time is in the sixth house of in Brazil's natal chart, but it has moved out of the inconjunct aspect. So that tells me that the health related issues may be starting to diminish at this time. I think there's enough to say in the chart as far as the transits go that Brazil will at least be having some alleviation of this, at least for some time. But what has to be remembered too is that, I mean, when Pluto again, when it does go back to direct at some point, it's going to traverse the 12th house of Brazil. And when you have transit Pluto in the 12th house, that could sometimes be manifest in deaths that may come from something that may be unseen. That's something that might hit you somewhat surreptitiously. So Brazil needs to be careful, like all countries anyway, regardless of transits, not to become overly complacent just because you're having a situation where you might not have the escalation in cases. What happens is when people become complacent as a result of you're talking about maybe where you have the cases where they're diminished, when you see the daily growth or the daily confirmed cases going down and diminishing, it's more susceptible to fluctuation. What I'm saying is when people become overly confident or complacent, they become arrogant, they might start to think, okay, this is diminishing. I'm gonna stop taking precautions. I'm not gonna be wearing my mask as frequently. I'm not gonna be doing contact tracing as much. I'm gonna be taking my glasses off. This is where you have the fluctuation, because when that begins to happen again, then you could potentially have more escalation in those cases. Hold on a moment, people. And the reality is there's very few countries, I would say, that would be out of the woods yet, because this coronavirus has obviously become very prevalent. There's a proliferation of this in a number of countries. China, actually, ironically, China, the fact that, I mean, they had it really big when it first hit them, because the best of my knowledge, that's where this originated from. And now they've have it really contained, and they've done what they're supposed to do, and it's time for the other countries to make sure they do what they're supposed to do, and that includes Brazil. And this is a situation where, again, it does appear that Brazil, it might be on the downside now. It may have actually reached that pinnacle or plateau or what have you, and at this point in time, maybe it will start to diminish, and prayerfully that will be the case. And anyway, there's really not much more really had to say about it, except that you're looking at this at this chart for Brazil, and the transits do they appear to me that they're going to be in the clear. I mean, at least for some time. There's going to be a time at some point, though, when the transit north node in Gemini will conjunct the natal Jupiter in Gemini, and those could, I mean, that could manifest in issues that one may have to confront and address that are associated with breathing, respiratory situations, because you're talking about Gemini can be associated with that energy, and Jupiter can enlarge and expand issues. The North Node, when it's in transit, can be about issues that one may have to confront and address. So it's just something to keep an eye on. And another thing too is that when you're talking about the transit Sun, when it hits Leo, and then when it's going to be near that 22 degrees, and it's going to make when it makes the opposition to the ascendant of Brazil, when it makes the opposition from the sixth house of health, there can be some issues that may be health related that might be tied in to stroke and heart attack at this time, and even like overexertion. A Leo energy could be nearly indefatigable and inexorable, so it is something to look at. And at that time, you're going to have the transit Sun in very close proximity to the natal Venus of Brazil, which is the fourth house ruler. The fourth house, of course, can be associated with the end of life. So there are some things to look at. I mean, for right now, Brazil might be starting to get out of the woods, but it doesn't mean they might not have a little resurgence later on at some point that could be health related, may be tied into the coronavirus. Heart stroke issues I researched recently may be tied in with the coronavirus. You might not see that on some websites, but apparently it's something now which may be associated. The people found out that it may be associated with as far as some symptoms that might be associated with the coronavirus, or it could simply be issues that may escalate if you actually already are in danger, or you have some situation that you have for whatever reason might be at a greater risk for heart attack or stroke. You need to be careful at this time with the coronavirus in full force. So anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying stay well.